Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Krein, and I am honored to be here. Is there an echo? I'm honored to be here today to really spend the next 90 minutes talking about a topic that is so near and dear to so many of our hearts. And type 1 diabetes is important every day of the year, but today it's especially important because today is World Diabetes Day, if you haven't heard. So I want to first give an shout out to all of the people not only affected by type 1 diabetes, but those who have loved ones who are and who recognize the importance of type 1 diabetes and its impact on families and the economy and people's lives in so many ways. The type 1 diabetes moonshot, which Startup Health launched earlier this year, is really one of the most important new moonshots that we've launched in the past decade. Startup Health, for those of you who aren't familiar, is an organization that launched in 2011 to inspire and educate and invest in a global army of entrepreneurs and innovators who are working to solve the world's greatest health challenges. And all of these entrepreneurs, now almost 500 strong from all around the world, are working on companies individually and collectively through collaboration. And the model that Startup Health has pioneered over the last decade is around this idea of collaboration, bringing people together from all different perspectives, entrepreneurs and innovators, academics, investors and philanthropists, industry, payers, providers, pharmaceutical companies, and patients and families to come together and bring their unique abilities to the challenge that these entrepreneurs and innovators are trying to solve. And we often refer to this moonshot framework because it's not just the idea of what happened in the 1960s when JFK proclaimed, let's put a man on the moon and bring him safely back by the end of the decade. It's not the idea of just setting that goal, like the goal of preventing, curing, and managing type 1 diabetes. It's this idea of collaboration. There were 400,000 people and 20,000 companies that collaborated for a decade to land a man on the moon and bring him safely back. Everybody had a different, unique ability to contribute to that cause. And when we set out to build an ecosystem of entrepreneurs and innovators and partners working on health moonshots, we had very broad categories like curing disease and bringing access to care to everyone in the world. But the launch of the type 1 diabetes moonshot earlier this year under the leadership of David Weingard, a seasoned entrepreneur, ex-executive from Microsoft, who's been working to bring innovation to this space for almost a decade, we knew that we had to do something different and really create an open conversation and a call to action so that we can inspire and educate and invest in a generation of entrepreneurs and innovators who are working to solve type 1 diabetes, prevent and manage and cure it. And while people have talked about it for a long time, we are at the beginning of an epic decade where we believe that the technology and the ecosystem and the money and the resources that we can bring to the table can have us sitting in a radically different place a decade from now when we talk about type 1 diabetes. Earlier this year, I had the honor of being invited to see an incredible documentary called The Human Trial, which tells the story of a number of different people, a number of different organizations, but a lot of different stakeholders coming together to show the experience that everybody goes through to bring new innovation to market, and in particular, type 1 diabetes, following the patients, following the startup, following the doctors and the clinicians and everybody that's involved in this journey of a patient. So as a setup for today's conversation, I'm going to give you a little preview of this incredible documentary produced by a number of the people not only on this stage, but people in the audience. The Robert and Marla Oringer, who helped fund this documentary, have been working for a long time to start the conversation and bring in awareness. And so no better day than World Diabetes Day here at Health, the Startup Health Festival. I would like to introduce you to The Human Trial.
There's a lot of unknowns, and I think it's the unknowns that are terrifying. And it's me. It's me on that operating table.
We're developing the bioartificial pancreas that can potentially cure type 1 diabetes.
It's become a joke that the cure is always 5 years away. But if it's so close, what is taking so long? Do you feel guilty that the cure is always 5 years away?
I don't feel guilty. I feel hopeful.
When you're doing clinical research, there's always the first patient.
Hi. Nice to meet you. I have some extreme lows, which cause me to have seizures.
I'm going blind.
It takes 10 to 20 years to develop a new drug.
This is my life's work.
We need the investment to prove to you that this works.
We have 180 days of cash.
What happens if you don't raise the money?
Shut the doors.
Part of science that I'm trying to come to grips with on my own is it even working?
Yeah.
Because if it works, it's like winning the lottery.
We still don't know how it'll work in people. And that's why we're all here, to make it work in people.
32 years in the waiting, hoped and prayed for this for a long time.
I don't know if I can keep doing this anymore.
It's just been really hard on them. But they're paving the way for others, so.
We're talking about my life here. I'm not afraid of death, but I need to be here for my daughter. That's what this is about.
How much is riding on this?
Everything. Sorry.
It has been more than I ever expected.
You're showing efficacy.
To see it come this far, it's amazing.
I like to think I'm a pioneer. Where you read in textbooks, she was the first. So, fingers crossed.
Please join me in welcoming David Weingard, Deb Dugan, Tomas Walker, and Cynthia Rice. You wanted to moderate, didn't you, David? Welcome. I urge you to watch this film because it tells such an important story. And when I sat in the audience this summer at the previews, I was struck by how many different perspectives it provided. It wasn't just through the lens of a patient. It wasn't just through the lens of the investors or philanthropists or academics or industry. It really told different stories, all interwoven beautifully. I'd love for you to each take a moment to introduce yourself. And each of you come from different perspectives and different backgrounds. And I'd love you to introduce yourself and perhaps touch on why type 1 diabetes is personal to you and what you and maybe your organization are doing to contribute to achieving this type 1 diabetes moonshot, starting with Cynthia.
Great, thank you. I'm Cynthia Rice. I'm the Chief Mission Strategy Officer for JDRF. Type 1 diabetes is personal to me because of the burden it places on people with type 1 and their families. And JDRF was founded by parents of children with type 1 diabetes, and we're still governed by people personally affected by the disease. And T1D is a disease that people have to live with and manage 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. If you give yourself too much insulin, it can be deadly. If you give yourself too little insulin, you can have long-term complications. And even with all the amazing devices that many people on this panel and JDRF have helped make possible, we still need cures, and this film really underscores that. JDRF has funded $2.5 billion of research since our founding, including funding via site, which is profiled in the movie. We advocate for change, for coverage, for devices. We help support the community. We have a T1D fund that invests in companies. So we're involved all across the pipeline, and we're really excited to be here today.
Thank you, Cynthia. David.
I'm incredibly excited what we're doing here with the T1D Moonshot. And my journey began as a patient at the age of 36, finding out that I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes literally by having no energy and being 30 pounds lighter 1 week than I was 2 weeks earlier, if you could imagine that. And got to the doctor, and thankfully there's insulin, and began a regimen and started looking for help out there. And there's a lot of resources, but they're not really deep and educational. And I was fortunate to find a great diabetes educator, a clinician, a nurse named Cynthia, who gave me the personalized compassion, support, education that I needed to live an empowered life, which thankfully I have. And gone and done my Ironman triathlons and other things with type 1 diabetes. And I owe her a debt of gratitude for all the care and support that she gave me at that critical time in my life. And left Microsoft actually to found a company that we named after her, 1 Health, that has helped hundreds of thousands of people with diabetes by giving them personalized care, now what's recognized as telemedicine across the US. And while we've helped that many people, now the opportunity is to leverage the ecosystem and drive entrepreneurs to scale that to millions of people around the world. And that's an unbelievable opportunity. So we're here to celebrate what we've accomplished together, but how far we can go together to prevent, manage, and cure the disease. And that would be my hope for 10 years from now, that we're farther along to the cure, and that we'll also have the infrastructure to take care of the people every single day. As Cynthia beautifully said, 24/7, not only the patients, but the families and close friends who are looking after them as well.
Thank you, David. Tomas.
Hi, I'm Tomas Walker. I'm the Vice President of Clinical Affairs at Dexcom, where I oversee our work with investigator-initiated studies, automated insulin delivery, our medical and scientific writing, as well as our medical education and a few dozen other things. And I really developed my passion for diabetes care. While I've been with Dexcom for a bit over 8 years, I spent 17 years with a diabetology practice, helping people who were living with type 1 diabetes. And I recognized fairly early on that we could impact the lives and the course of disease if we could find what worked for those people, what worked for them individually. Because diabetes is a disease of self-management. And I used to tell patients there's 8,760 hours in a year. I may see you for 2 or 3 hours this year. The rest of the time, we have to figure out what I can do to assist you. And when the opportunity came to join Dexcom to help lead their clinical efforts, to help lead the new CGM development projects, I leaped at it.
Amazing. Oh, hi, I'm Deb Dugan. I run Beyond Type 1. My background's a little out of the box. I worked in the AIDS fight with Bono of U2 and disrupted philanthropy and brought in $600 million in the fight against AIDS when it was needed most. And so I look for disruption where it needs to happen and how it can, and who are those strange bedfellows that could come together and change the game. So I was working, well, I helped teach a class at Columbia MBA program and School of Engineering called Think Bigger on the neuroscience of innovation, and was tapped by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation during COVID to do innovation in the time of COVID. And there were all these problems to solve, from ventilators to oxygen, and we used the private sector's capacity of innovation, NASA, who knows how to get oxygen from Mars, the snorkeling mask company in Italy that knew how to put a 3D valve and all of a sudden have life-saving devices go throughout India. So it was an interesting time. And during that time, and it's just a crazy coincidence, my assistant, who has type 1 diabetes, decided to do the ViaCyte trial of this film. And I watched her fly to San Diego and participate, and it was hard, and ended up 6 months ago deciding to join Beyond Type 1, because it is a startup. It's a group of under 25 people that want to change the game. And we represent the voice of the patient, and we have what I call a loyalty loop. We hear, we get insight, we look at data, we know what they need, and then we do those programs, and we try to change the game. So very excited to be here. Thank you.
First of all, I am so excited to dig in today. So what we've decided to do was take some clips from the film, from the documentary, from the 4 different perspectives that I think really shed light on the challenges that we have as innovators, the challenges we have as investors or philanthropists, the challenges we have on the clinical and academic side that we face every day, but also look at what opportunities we're sitting on today, especially at the end of 2022. And then what the strengths are. You know, there's so much great work and so much great progress over the last several decades, especially over the last decade, but so much more to do. So we're going to use these 4 framings: patients and families, entrepreneurs, innovators, and startups, clinical research and academia, and investors, philanthropists, family offices, and foundations. So those are the 4 different perspectives. And we're going to start with the first clip on patients and families. Take a look.
From the time I was very little, I said that I would always be first in line if something came up or there was the opportunity for a cure.
Nervous?
There's a lot of unknowns, and I think it's the unknowns that are terrifying. I like to think I'm a pioneer. Where you read in textbooks 50 years later, she was the first. She was the first one to try it, and it worked.
This is you?
It's a huge deal. You know, this can impact millions of diabetics. And it's me. It's me on that operating table.
This way. We're the first door on the left here. This is right here.
Deb, I want to start with you.
Yeah, I mean, how raw is this? This is humanity in your face, and these stories are so important to tell. I certainly didn't know all that goes into a clinical trial and what happens to the families. And I believe it's 19% of clinical trials don't go forward because there's not adequate volunteers, there's not representation. And so when you can reach a lot of people and get their trust and tell the right stories, you can get more people to feel comfortable participating. But in order to get the underserved, we're going to have to help with their days off, with their transportation, with home care. It's not, oh, here it is available, and we at all our sites have like where you could sign up. It's that we have to go to them and make it possible for them to participate in clinical trials.
Before we move to Tomas, I'd like to ask your perspective of the first time you saw the film and you watched this story unfold from her perspective. And we all talked about this on our prep call. We were talking about her story makes this, it's very obvious that innovation is not just a company going and working on a product or a solution. It's taking people who have themselves, along with their families, already gone through a lot, but it's taking them through a incredibly roller coaster filled journey of emotion. What were your thoughts when you saw this for the first time?
Well, I cried. I think this film it's not an easy film, I'll just warn you, but it is so impactful. And as I mentioned, my assistant, who was 22, said, yeah, I'd give my life for a cure. And so that resonated with me while I watched it each step of the way.
Tomas?
So I actually have I lead a team of about 20 at Dexcom, and one of my team was actually in this trial. And I shared this video with him, and we discussed it. And there's a personal level to it that doesn't always translate to it when you're working at it from the clinical side. It's very easy to sit and write a complicated protocol and have a staff meeting and argue about the data flow. But at the end of the day, it's important we deliver the full spectrum here, that we're delivering the human element, solid research that's reproducible, and takes the product or the message or the outcome, the development forward. Unfortunately, it is a slower process than we all like, but I think we've seen ways to improve that, particularly over the last several years.
David, you've got an incredibly unique perspective as a patient yourself. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I almost want to take a step back why so many people are so passionate about finding a cure and would go through the clinical trial is to bring to life that someone with type 1 diabetes doesn't create insulin in their body. What that means is that they're dependent either on an injection or using a pump to give them insulin 24 hours a day. And they need that insulin to live. And then when they ingest carbohydrate in a meal, they have to make some rough calculations and take more insulin to cover it. So you can never get a break. I always say, diabetes is a job that no one wants. It's like, and you can't take a vacation from it. So you could imagine parents who have a child diagnosed, babies, infants that are months old that are diagnosed with type 1. Now, not only does that infant need to get insulin and go through a life full of injections and 24/7, but the family, its life is turned upside down because they're monitoring. If you go have a low blood sugar, the child or the adult can pass out and go into shock. And if you go too high, all kinds of complications over time occur, as Cynthia mentioned. And so this becomes not only a personal experience for the person who's diagnosed, whatever their age, but for the whole family and their friends. So it's tiring, and we all tough it out. And there's a 50% attachment rate to chronic depression for people with type 1, because again, you can't take a vacation from it. So this all leads into why you see so many families doing the JDRF cure walks and bike-a-thons to raise money for a cure, and why everybody here is so passionate about these clinical trials that are the stepping stones to the cure. It really will be a game changer when we get there, but in the path to get there, it's going to take an army of commercial entrepreneurs to build out the supporting infrastructure, technologies, clinical care, tools, analytics around the world to not only help around the cure side and the prevention, but to manage the now, which the now, we don't know what the end date of the now is. It could be 10 years, it could be 15, 20, whenever that ends. And that's why we're all here collaborating.
Very well said. I mean, I think people who participate in clinical trials, they're our heroes. We can't have innovation, without them. And we really, across the sector, rely on their dedication. And, everything from, this trial, which, which required, putting insulin-producing cells, under the skin in this brand new therapy, to, you may have seen on the State of the Union, President Biden called out a young man, Joshua Davis, who had type 1 diabetes, who was diagnosed when he was 1, and he and his family have been advocates ever since. And they've been advocating for affordable insulin, but also they've been actively participating in numerous device clinical trials. And the early device clinical trials required people to live at the hospital for a week while these devices were tried out. Of course, now they're much more at home. And there's a new therapy under review at the FDA, which is a 14-day infusion. You have to go, those clinical trial participants went, and for 14 days in a row, they were, infused an hour or two a day. And this critical therapy, though, that data shows, delays the onset of type 1 diabetes for 3 years. So all of these, are somewhat arduous for the people with type 1. And I guess I'll say just briefly that, diversity in clinical trials is a huge challenge, and we're working to try to address that. And like others, we have on our website a tool so that anyone can go and find a type 1 diabetes trial they might be eligible for. So we'd encourage all of you to share, that clinical trial finder and others as well, because we need to help educate people.
So let's dig a little further on the patient side from two perspectives. Tomas, I'd love you to explain what this documentary is talking about with ViaCyte and what it does, I think it'd be helpful just to give that context for what this was a clinical trial for, because we're not going to watch the whole movie here.
Right.
But I'd also like to dig into what you just mentioned, Cynthia, which is the challenge with getting more patients into the clinical trials to speed up the innovation and some of the challenges that need to be eliminated that hopefully entrepreneurs and innovators and everybody can help make happen. But I want to kind of both talk about ViaCyte and then I want to talk about the challenges with clinical trials. Tomas?
Sure. So the ViaCyte trial was using laboratory-grown human islet cells. So inside the pancreas, there's islet cells. Islet cells are the cells that make insulin. You're born with about 1 million of them. And as you age and live and go through life, they die. And when you get below somewhere between 300 and 500,000 of them left, you no longer can manage your glucose normally. This study looked at growing them in the laboratory, encapsulating them, and then implanting them in humans to see if we could get these capsules to live inside a human being and produce insulin. And they specifically looked at a marker called collagen peptide, or C-peptide, which is a marker of islet cells producing insulin. One of the key things they were developing was a membrane that would allow the insulin to go out, but stop the antibodies from coming in. Because type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease, and after you have these antibodies, you have them for life, which is why even when you get a beta cell transplant from a cadaver donor or a pancreas transplant from a cadaver donor, you end up being on anti-rejection drugs, and unfortunately, they still often fail over the next few years.
So what's the biggest challenge here with getting more people in clinical trials? I'm fascinated by the lack of this being an open conversation, not in the industry, but to the public. You don't read about it in People magazine, you don't read about it in the news generally. But what needs to happen here to both attract more and succeed with more patients and families making that decision? And one of the things, just to kind of integrate into this, is I wasn't aware of how many other people get involved besides the patient when you're doing a clinical trial, the family, the caregivers, and other people. And the show-stopping that occurs and prevents us from perhaps getting more innovation through the pipeline faster. And whoever wants to jump in and tackle that, I think there's a
Well, I'll
big,
just start and say that there are multiple potential barriers, and I think that's part of the challenge. I mean, one is just information about what trials are available. The other is just, people knowing other people who have gone through it and feeling comfortable, and we share on social media, and we have people who talk at our events who say, well, I was in a clinical trial and this is what it was like for me, and that sort of individual storytelling, I think really helps. And frankly, then there's also the sort of the logistics of it all. People who live close to an academic center, it's easier for them to get there. There are a lot of people newly diagnosed, you need to be at a certain stage of type 1 for a certain trial, and a number of people are children, and that's a little bit more complicated. So there's lots of challenges, but again, we're trying to tackle them through education and information.
Yeah, I would just add, there's a stigma. People don't want people at work to know, or all sorts of issues confusing type 1 with type 2, and a lack of trust, like a very serious lack of trust of. Who are these people and why should I do this? So the peer-to-peer becomes really important of the whole support group of we're going through it together. And so when you look at, I think of the innovators who are probably in this room, whether you're from IBM, Noom, Google, Fitbit, like there's all these ways now to give unprecedented support. And to be able to have people talk to each other and say we're going through this together, and to build trust and community. And as I said, go to that community to get people to be involved in clinical trials.
David?
Yeah, what I would add is a huge challenge is I would focus more from my perspective on the innovation and supporting the entrepreneurs who are trying to provide the services to help the patients in all the areas that we've talked about, and the peer networks. So when we were building Cecilia, it was incredible to talk to investors who didn't know what type 1 diabetes was, the impact, or if they were not aligned with its mission, just passed and moved on to the next thing. And so I think what's really needed is to create an awareness and catalyze through Startup Health, the sense of accelerating education, innovation, attracting capital, feeding the ecosystem so that we have hundreds of entrepreneurs who can be very successful. And we've talked to so many, through Startup Health. They may be in Germany or in Israel or in different parts of the world doing incredible things. Well, let's scale them and help them there, and let's bring that skill set to the US and vice versa. So I think there's so much more that could be done in the investor community to support and really transform. The other part that I just want to mention is the health system. The health systems, go by the law of numbers, and 90% of the people with diabetes are type 2 diabetes, and a lot of the focus is on them, which is great. But we should be realizing that the implication of not supporting the type 1 means that the type 1s may end up in acute care in the hospital. There's huge cost involved, and investing in support and technologies, providing access to tools like Dexcom, like insulin pumps from Tandem and Insulet. There's so many great technologies and there's great services that can really provide game-changing care. And I would put out there a call for, Steve likes to use the word batteries included kind of mindset for health systems to embrace what is possible now to manage diabetes as we are on the path for a cure.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that so much of the conversation with investors and organizations involved with innovation is about the business models and so many other parts of a very important, very complex set of issues to talk about. But we have found, and this is probably going on a decade now, that there are entrepreneurs running around talking about the businesses they're starting. There's investors looking at the potential market size and the potential impact, but there's definitely a lack of impact-aligned investors and partners and philanthropists that are underscoring the need for the impact. And the patient story that's told in this movie that I think needs to be told almost as a requirement to any investor coming in or backer of a company is that you have to understand why we're doing this. And it's so often left out of the conversation. And I thought it was an important place to start as we go through the other perspectives. Before we move on to entrepreneurs and innovators, anybody add anything else about the patient perspective or the family perspective? Because I learned a lot about as we were launching this moonshot, from a parent's perspective, what it's like when your child is diagnosed. Yeah. And how oftentimes, we talked about this at lunch, Deb, how oftentimes the parent is told by their endocrinologist the diagnosis and that's it. Yeah. And what you're doing with your organization to bring that moment into light.
Well, it's a journey, right? So today is World Diabetes Day, so we're doing a big campaign. I think we've reached like 150 million already. It's going to be in People magazine. 150 million. Yeah. Well, we're lucky. We have Nick Jonas and Priyanka Chopra and a lot of others on our board that just blast it out. But it's knowing the signs of diabetes and type 1. It's life-saving, and we know the signs for stroke. We know the signs for heart attack. We know the signs for choking. Why don't we know the signs? That's going to save somebody's life and diabetes. And of course, it's thirst, exhaustion, change in weight, and excessive urination. So you'll see if you're on Instagram, follow us, people going like this and doing the signs. That's the first step. And then when you're just diagnosed, all the information that you need to know, and I'll just be honest and say it's very scientific if you go to the Mayo Clinic site, and it's not accurate if you go to YouTube. So something in the middle is what we try to do in very plain language, in probably, I don't know, over 100 different languages because we're all over the world, and in your culture. let you know about the foods that it's okay to eat and how are you going to manage this and what are all those systems in place. And then of course there's the advocacy side of it, of smashing a system that doesn't work, and then there's the faster cure. So on that we help the person with diabetes and their family on a journey.
You slipped in there Nick Jonas, but you know, Jonas Brothers were here for the last couple days.
They're here in Vegas.
But I wanted to touch on the why here, because Deb used to run Red and had the privilege and honor and capability of Bono, obviously behind it. But I thought it was interesting, and I know this predates you running Beyond Type 1, but Nick Jonas has been out there as a patient, but also somebody obviously that reaches an audience that will listen to what you just described. Can you just talk a little bit about that celebrity piece and how important it is for the awareness of this to children, families, parents, and how important it is just to have that kind of visibility and exposure?
I mean, Nick was diagnosed when he was 13. Actually, tomorrow was the anniversary of when he was diagnosed. And he's just always felt like if he could use his celebrity to amplify and to have some impact in this world, that he would. I love having a 30-year-old boss that is trying to change the system, but it's not him alone. It's the artists in the community. It's the DJ that has Type 1. It really is about galvanizing a movement. Mm-hmm. Galvanizing a movement, because actually there's a lot of people that just like celebrities, you know, hey, and peer-to-peer is probably more important now. But it can start a chain of something. So that's why, you know, in Grand Central today, everybody walking to their trains will see the signs of diabetes for the first time. And, you know, and those kinds of things, the power of influencers. And more people are getting their information, certainly youth, from TikTok than Google. So if you're not there, you're not capturing an audience that needs to know.
Yeah, few people are more motivated than a parent of someone with type 1 diabetes, a spouse, people themselves. I mean, I've worked in advocacy in a number of forums and in and out of government, and no one is as motivated as the type 1 diabetes community. It's one of the reasons why I think we're making a lot of progress in science and in innovation, because when someone starts a company or has a clinical trial, you know, people want to help. People want to lean in and jump in and donate and activate and do things. So it's a very motivated community because of the burdens.
And I'll just say, you capture hearts and minds by taking children to Congress.
Yes.
Like
yes.
It's very, very moving, and everybody
Nick
talks
Jonas
about it all year.
testified one year for us when he was about 13, I think.
Yeah.
But yes, we bring 150 kids to Congress for what we call the JDRF Children's Congress. Applications are due November 30th for next 2023 for any of you who know anyone who might want to apply. It really is impactful, and the members of Congress all remember the families that they've met.
Well, if patients and families are the why we're here, I want to shift to the entrepreneurs and the innovators and the startups. And yes, Dexcom once upon a time was a startup itself too. Mm-hmm. So entrepreneurs, innovators, and startups, let's cue the clip that talks about ViaCyte talking about the cure being 5 years away. Mm.
Do you feel guilty that the cure is always 5 years away?
I don't feel guilty. I feel hopeful. I feel really hopeful. I'm not kidding.
You do?
Yes.
Like, really? For
That's
real?
so nice of you.
I'm working here. I can see what's going on. It's gonna be good for you. I know it's been really hard as heck. I mean,
Thanks.
I'm not kidding. It's true. I mean, there's no person with a Dexcom or a pump or anything works as well as the cells. The cells have evolved over millions of years. They're the best glucose sensors, the best insulin pumps in the world. That's what biology is all about, and that's why we're doing it this way. It takes a ton of work and a ton of money, but it's worth it.
I get choked up when I see each of these clips, but you can feel in his eyes, in his voice, cracking. David, this is your plight, my friend, as an entrepreneur yourself, who walks in these shoes.
Yeah, it's amazing. You could see in his eyes, as you said, the passion to make a difference in the landscape. And to what Cynthia was saying earlier, there's no one that is impacted by diabetes that's not really passionate about doing something about it. And I think that's an opportunity and a challenge. So somebody might have an idea and want to do something, but is it going to be something that's scalable and commercially impactful? Will it help 10 people or 20 people? That's great. But imagine if we can guide them and mentor them so it could help 10,000. And so while we're on on this journey, a very exciting journey to get to a cure, can we nurture the commercial innovation engine, and can we take entrepreneurs who have great ideas, or they may be scientists or physicians or come from another discipline where they need to kind of learn the business mindset to succeed, and can we bring them together to really accelerate that prevention, managing, and cure? And I think that's why I'm so excited about this moonshot, is because there's such need, there's so much passion, there's such demand, but there's such an opportunity to accelerate innovation, and people want to do it. They just need a bridge. There's organizations coming out with grant funding that don't know what to do when they finish the grant. Well, imagine if Startup Health they come through an academy where they're mentored and coached and learn from their peers and their network, and they're marketed and their value is unlocked so that investors understand and make investments, and they start to really create a cascading positive change in the landscape. And that's what we're doing here.
David, how often were you put in the same seat he was in?
A little too often. I'm grateful for my investors, and I hope some of them are sitting in our office, in the audience, because they got it, and they invested in Cecilia and got us to the point where now, under the leadership of Mark Claremont, we're doing great things as well. And I really think that there's so many more investors that are needed that really need to understand the pain, the challenge, and the opportunity, to use Steve's words, the double bottom line, the why, the emotional and social impact, but of course also the economic impact. You look at the value that a company like Dexcom created in the market, it's huge. And we all won't be Dexcom size, but there'll be some multiple and some return. So it's doing good while creating economic value as well.
Cynthia, you talked about the billions that JDRF has put into research through grants. It was the first and largest dedicated fund, the T1D fund, that Sean Doherty started, and now the organization is backing a lot of R&D and work that maybe even predates the idea of commercialization and scale. What's your perspective on when you watch this?
Yeah, no, let me say a few things about this. First of all, our goal is to have multiple shots on goal, right? I mean, we were an early funder of ViaCyte, actually before it was even called ViaCyte, and we want ultimately for this technology and others to be bought by larger companies. But there are multiple other cell therapies, other approaches for the cells themselves, other approaches for protecting the cells that we've also held back. And we need to make sure that they can move from the early stages, all the way through to reaching people with type 1. And part of our, what we do is to leverage other dollars. I mean, one of the great things about the JDRF T1D fund is not only the 30 companies that the T1D fund is invested in, but it's catalyzed another $600 million from independent investors in the T1D fund, because our team could explain to them why a certain company made sense to invest in. So, we are hopeful about the future, because there are these multiple shots on goal. There are multiple cures therapies, cell therapies and disease-modifying therapies in human clinical trials now. We have the first ever disease-modifying therapy in the final stages of FDA review, and we may have news this week on that. So it's an exciting time, but these things take time, and it's frustrating for the community and for everyone that it takes time. So I think that clip really illustrated both of those things.
Yeah, and the numbers you outlined, the couple $100 million and almost $1 billion, I guess, combined, it's amazing, but it's actually crazy that's all it is from one organization. Think about the missed opportunity. There shouldn't just be one Dexcom, and sorry for the competition, there should be 10 or 20 companies, 30 companies of that size working with different solutions in different parts of this. I brought up that moonshot metaphor of like we're 400,000 people and 20,000 companies to land a man on the moon and bring him back. How many are working on type 1 diabetes at scale that have the ability to impact those lives? I'd love to hear your perspective, Tomas. Not just from being at Dexcom, but your background, and also how many companies approach Dexcom about collaboration and opportunities to work together.
Sure. So I'll tell you from a clinical perspective, there's not enough. There's not enough people working on this. And I think one of the common things that gets missed is people say, oh, type 1 diabetes is primarily a disease that's going to impact younger people. The reality is you can become type 1 diabetic at any stage in life. The oldest person I ever diagnosed with type 1 diabetes was 90 years old. And she was mad as a wet cat when I told her. But there's not enough investment and support in it. We get approached constantly. I would say a minimum of 2 to 3 times a week. I have a conversation with someone who has an idea somewhere along the spectrum from the, hey, I woke up last night and was thinking about this, to that we have a small startup, to we're maybe getting a pilot grant from JDRF or from NIH, and we're trying to see if we can take this to the next step. Can Dexcom support us? Dexcom has a very open policy of supporting studies. Obviously, I cannot support everything that comes through, but to put it in perspective, my team of less than 20 is managing well over 140 trials that other people are running. These are being done externally in the community that we're providing systems or data or just clinical support or just a tap on the shoulder that says, why don't you talk to me before you do that? And that's what makes the difference. When you get people who are willing to go where maybe a large corporation wouldn't, to go in there, to take the risk, to be willing to say, you know what, we tried that and it didn't work. You know, remember what Thomas Edison said, I know 120 ways to not make a light bulb. So it's the same concept.
Yeah, it's not that dissimilar from how many Apollo missions it took to get there, right? Mm-hmm. You think about the capital that's needed, the people that are needed, the organizations that are needed, the regulatory changes that are needed. I want to talk about how to catalyze a community, because I think one of the things both you did at Red and now you're doing it Beyond Type 1 is using a platform to not just educate patients and families, but as we were talking about, I was so happy that Marla connected us and we had that lunch, because it opened up my eyes to how much potential there is in your community with entrepreneurs and innovators who might have ideas but not know where to go or what to do next. And it seems so daunting, but I'm hoping that through this moonshot and through our collaboration, we can bring more entrepreneurs or people who want to be entrepreneurs and innovators to become successful, commercialize, and scale their organizations. But I want to talk a little bit about your perspective, what you've learned.
No, it's so interesting because in the time of COVID, all tech and innovation and being digital advanced 5 years like that. The economists called it techceleration. And yet, World Health went back 25 years, and many more people, 120 million, fell into extreme poverty and everything. And so when you go, the one common denominator, you know, you can be in Ghana, and there's an innovation hub and a picture of Steve Jobs on the wall, is that all around youth believe that there's problems to be solved and that they're the innovators and the entrepreneurs that are going to get the job done. And since you brought up Edison, I'll bring up Albert Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes on the problem and only 5 on the solution. And this generation wants to do that. They want to focus on the problem, they want to get it done, but many times they don't know how. So we try to cast a wide net and say, if you have an idea, if you you should know this is bubbling up over here. There's something quite interesting. Come, let us help you get to that stage where you're learning how to do it, and hopefully can get funding to get to the next stage. But there is a generation that wants to change the game.
No, if I can add, because I love the way you engage the community to foster the innovation and motivate. And it was interesting tying it back to what you were talking about, how the Dexcom team receives every week these ideas that may be good ideas or maybe things that they need to be nurtured. And one of the things that I've been really impressed working with Startup Health is this mentality around not only finding entrepreneurs with the right mindset, but using a scorecard that has categories listed out that are very thoughtful about these are the areas that can really transform this type 1 diabetes and also the other disease states that Startup Health supports through its other moonshots. And so with an impact board that we pulled together that includes the JDRF team and other members here, we built a scorecard for T1D. Basically, what ideas will be transformational in the T1D space. So while we're all working and striving for a cure, what molecules, what digital health, what services, what technologies will be transformational? And let's guide the entrepreneurs to those areas, because the thought leaders around the table from all different parts of the industry said that these are the way the gaps are. And not only is it functional, but let's make sure it integrates access. So everything we do is for everybody, not for people who just have insurance or not, and not only in the US, but for the world. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a big part of really catalyzing change, is guiding the people that want to change to the areas that they can impact the most. And I think we've really taken a step, and that scorecard has been published, is transparent, is out in the market, and we welcome feedback to it, but we also talk to innovators every day and measure and guide them to that scorecard.
Well, when we, I'm going to shift over in a moment to clinical research and academia, but before I do, when we announced the funder and funding partners for the Moonshot very soon, you're going to hear that Startup Health is going to educate 100 entrepreneurs and innovators over the next 12 months. That's our goal, to bring 100 new companies into Startup Health to learn how to become backable, to learn what we're about to talk about, so they can navigate through to success. Because what we've discovered is that it can't be you invest and then you educate. It needs to be let's educate, find those innovators who are coachable, who understand what is needed to become backable, and can really catalyze the effort of bringing resources to bear and navigate, hopefully, the kinds of innovative, the barriers to innovation that exist right now. But what I'm about to show you in this next clip, I think talks through a little bit of the complexity. I thought it was bringing simplicity to complexity, but you'll see some of the challenges that entrepreneurs face and why the Academy can be such an important framework for them to learn how to navigate. Please play the clip.
Clinical studies like this are set up in phases for very good reason. The first phase is designed to determine basic safety, tolerance, and not put a whole bunch of patients at risk without understanding that it's safe first. The second phase is the most exciting, because that's where you get the data, the proof of concept.
2, 3.
Then the moment we'd all been waiting for. The FDA gave them the green light to move to phase 2 of the trial. It was finally time to see if the cells could work in people. How much is riding on this?
Everything. Everything. Sorry. Just going into it first.
I get the chills every time I see these clips. And I've seen them like a dozen times plus. Tomas.
You know, the very first time you do anything in a human, it's scary. But you have to trust the process, be open to review, and don't be afraid to hit the stop button. But if we don't do it, we don't make the progress we need to. So this is the whole process coming out of informed consent, the steps in clinical trials, external reviews by the regulatory agencies, who I think take a lot of flack, and always not appropriately, because they've helped us make better decisions too. And same thing with talking to patients and people who are in the trial. You get good feedback from this. So it's always going to be a process. You're always learning from it. It never stops. And the openness and the bidirectional communication is critical to make it work.
You know, one of the things that we found early in the days when Dexcom and the other companies were first, coming out with continuous glucose monitors, and we were working with the community to, drive forward on an artificial pancreas system, is that we needed to work very closely with the Food and Drug Administration, not only to help educate them on the unmet need and the science, but also to work with the academic investigators and the companies to sort of share information so that everyone could put their best case forward to the regulatory agencies. And we're doing that in cell therapies too, and it's critically important because, as I said, we have multiple shots on goal, multiple ways of encapsulating cells and types of cells that entrepreneurs and companies are moving forward. And we've literally been bringing to FDA sort of experts in cell biology, multiple times a year, behind closed doors sessions to sort of educate, the FDA team. And our goal is to really lay down a pathway so that when the next set of entrepreneurs come, they're coming to an agency that already knows about cell therapy, already knows about type 1 diabetes, so that we can kind of smooth the path as much as possible.
How many ideas, Tomas, come to you or Cynthia to JDRF where they have no idea what lies ahead in the complexity of bringing that idea to market?
A lot, all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. No, I mean, very bright academic scientists who know their specialty area, but don't really know the process of how to get from there to where they need to be, which is why there's a pathway that needs to happen.
Yeah. I actually had a conversation with someone about a month ago, and we were discussing their next steps in their trial, and I said, well, you're going to have to involve the FDA, and we're going to have to discuss it with them as you go forward to talk about getting an IDE for this. And the investigator's comment to me was, I'm not telling those guys anything.
Right. How crazy is that?
And it was like, stop.
David, from an entrepreneur's perspective, how willing were people along the way to tell you what you needed to know about the next step and the next step? And was there any roadmap provided about how the friction can be removed so that you and your team and your partners can actually have success versus what you just said, which is closely guarded secrets and, hey, let everybody figure it out on their own?
Yeah, I mean, really, I felt like we had to figure it out ourselves, and we were out on an island, and frankly, we started Cecilia Health about 12 years ago, so it was before there was a digital health investment community, and telemedicine and all the other value-based care really came on board. But we had to basically work, and we signed businesses and delivered services that we innovated while we built the business. And then we're at a stage where the market kind of caught up, and there was capital, and we grew from there. Mm-hmm. And I say this, in my passion for what Startup Health is doing. When we joined and were accepted to the Startup Health community, we were able to connect with the network of other entrepreneurs who were like me, working on an island, and were able to share ideas. This is, how do you really sign a health plan, and how are you successful navigating contracts through a health plan? How do you measure KPIs that you're showing cost improvement, and quality improvements to a health plan so that you can really continue to take care of the members? How is it different in Medicare, Medicaid, commercial? All kinds of strategies like that, let alone working with pharma, med device companies, going through not only HIPAA compliance, but high trust, which is data security. I mean, you really learning from your peers and then getting coached by the Startup Health team. What's the best way to package the value of the company so that you're attracting investors who understand the mission, that's double bottom line, and invest, and you're able to grow and create even bigger sustainable value and impact. And I think that whole education and being part of the community, getting the marketing exposure that Startup Health provides, really is unbelievably key for us to, accelerate change. I mean, 20% of the GDP is healthcare, right? I mean, it's not going away. We really have to find ways to innovate, and not only find them, but foster the success of the companies that are doing this innovation, doing the hard work of innovating in healthcare. So I came from technology. I always tell the story, I can go, whether I was at Microsoft or another company, to a trade show and walk out with 5 deals by the end of the trade show. You go to a healthcare conference, and maybe by the time a few years later when you have kids, maybe then you have a contract. And I don't mean this in any negative way, it's just the way it works. And this is an industry that we all want the best for the patients, whether it's type 1 diabetes or others, but it's ripe for disruption, and disruption in a good way through innovation and commercial ideas and great innovators that may come from JDRF through this system or other places. And I think that's what the opportunity is.
One of the things that we stress at Startup Health is the power of mindset, and how this whole community and the ecosystem that's going to change healthcare, that's going to achieve this moonshot, are going to be the people whose mindset is in the transformational zone, that is thinking different. And when I asked you, Deb, at lunch why you took the CEO role of Beyond Type 1, not having been in this community before, having done such amazing work on a global scale with RED, I was really interested in understanding your mindset and why you did this, because I think therein lies the opportunity for us to recruit from everywhere to help bring both internal and external mindset shift to this. But I think your answer and this reason that you took on this incredibly hard task as the CEO of Beyond Type 1, because of your excitement about what's ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, and you said it in the beginning about investing in innovation and purpose, and having a mindset of making the world better. And it seems when you were saying that length of time, David, and maybe it will come from other domains, it seems that we have to have a mindset of change, that it could come from somewhere else, so it can't make it so difficult for a genius in AI to be able to come and be trained and understand the regulations and everything like that. So it exists, I'll just say it out loud, easier with climate, with other things, where it's okay, I'm gonna invest and it's got purpose and I feel good about this at the end of the day. And all companies now are reporting on ESG, environment and social and governance. World health is like the most important thing. It actually has gone from, on the UN goals, what people care about, it was like 6, I hate to say it, after environment and equality and this and that. And then COVID happened, and now it's neck and neck with saving the planet. And so if we can't innovate quicker and have faster cures, look at how fast we got that vaccine. So we're removing the barriers, and now it's like, how do you educate those entrepreneurs? How do you get them in a system? How do you get them funded quickly? And it shouldn't be that you have to wait till your kids are in college, and it should be like, let's go.
It's a great segue to this last clip for the investors, philanthropists, family offices, and foundations. And a lot of people think the vaccine happened quickly. The reality is it was in R&D for decades, mRNA. In the 70s and 80s and 90s, it was shelved and brought back, and the number of collaborators was extraordinary, but it didn't actually even get into the hands of the VCs and the real investors until 2008 to 2010, something like that. And then when it started to be something people could understand how to make money from, and the potential, and seeing so many of the use cases, did almost a decade of work done on the commercialization scale side to be ready for a moment like the pandemic, right? So as we queue up this last clip, I want to underscore how tragic it is, given what we just talked about with patients and families, just how we talked about the struggle of the entrepreneur, or we talked about the process with clinical research. The ultimate lever here is funding. Funding with the amazing work that JDRF's done that should be 10, 100 times that from all kinds of organizations and people and funders. And this clip, I think, underscores the tragedy in this plight to prevent, manage, and cure diabetes, and how important it is to make it quicker. If we can roll this last clip, please.
It turns out that Saudi Arabia has one of the highest rates of type 1 diabetes in the world.
One thing about running a biotech company is you never stop raising money.
You have to turn over a lot of rocks, and you don't know where the investment might come from. This really represents potentially a functional cure. If this works as well in humans as it has in the animal models we study, it would essentially take it to a disease where patients no longer have to think about it any further. When we put
Does the American public understand the cost of developing a cure? I don't think they really have much of a clue as to what goes into getting that funding and how much you have to raise.
Hi, Paul Lakin, nice to meet you.
We've raised about $70 million in venture financing. In total, it's about $150 million that's been invested in the company to date to get us to where we are.
How much more do you?
That's the billion-dollar question.
What happens if you don't raise the money?
Shut the doors.
Funding at a scale at the time that nobody could wrap their head around by the US government. Today, there is no doubt that the funding is anemic in terms of really enabling the entrepreneurs and the innovators with the ideas and all of the different stakeholders and companies that are needed to bring these products through the stream. If we're gonna educate 100 entrepreneurs over the next year and maybe hundreds over the next several years, what do we need to do to unlock the funding to make sure that at every stage, whether you're at seed stage or early stage or growth stage or scale, that there's a line of people and organizations and families that want to back this because they understand that's the key that ties it all together?
I mean, I'd say JDRF is known for, the families that go and ask their friends and neighbors to support T1D research and raise the dollars that we then spend. But we've also really in the last decade, I think, focused on then we go to other institutions and tell them the value proposition of investing in T1D, whether it's the US government, whether it's governments in the EU and Australia and Canada, whether it's going to the private investors that the T1D fund does, to try to leverage, 5, 6, 7 times as much as what we're able to invest directly. And I think that's really, that's part of the collaboration and catalyzation that we all need to do. And one of the things that we're excited about, and Beyond Type 1 has been a great partner on this, is, we have this new T1D index that we released very recently with a group of partners, which is, for the first time, quantifies the burden of type 1 diabetes in every country across the globe. And using the best data that's been available, the underlying model was published in The Lancet. And the reason we're doing this is to sort of equip the T1D communities across the globe to help give them new information, to help basically go to their governments and go to their private sectors to sort of to push on the, if you make these changes, we'll have more people staying alive for longer, we'll have lower healthcare costs, we'll be able to advance this mission, to try to essentially catalyze more people to get involved in the T1D space.
By the way, we're going to do some Q&A. If you have any questions, there's going to be microphones, so just raise your hand. But I'm going to go through to David next, because this is obviously the showstopper, but also one of the reasons why you were so adamant about being the Chief Impact Officer of this moonshot.
Yeah, I think what we've talked about for the last hour is there's an incredible need, incredible business opportunity, incredible social impact opportunity to be involved in T1D, to really transform the landscape, to accelerate innovation. And I have two messages. One is that's a call out for support from the investment community, from the health care community, from health plans, health networks, to focus on the type 1 diabetes patient. I also want to express a lot of gratitude, because along the way, I have met unbelievable champions of Cecilia Health, of the patients with type 1 diabetes, that have launched programs that enabled us to thrive. And to go back to that batteries included, label, really got the big picture and were the difference in us kind of going sideways or growing. And they included, chief medical officers of health plans who committed to run a program, pharmaceutical companies who realized that they would be better off rolling out a patient program, getting people initiated and persistent on their medications, device organizations, large provider groups. And so there's a lot of great people out there doing supportive things, but imagine if we could multiply that and scale that. We would be here celebrating, because one day all of this will be a cure, and in the meantime, we need to take care of managing and wrapping up everything to support the patient and their families.
So I think it boils down to being willing to take risks.
Is his microphone on? Yep.
Hello?
No.
We lost your microphone. You can lean over to David.
Yeah. So I think it boils down to being willing to take a risk. And one of the things I commonly say at work is, if I guarantee you a clinical trial outcome, you need to fire me, because I can't guarantee you an outcome. Doing science right means things are not going to work out sometimes, but you're still going to learn from that. And being willing to take the risk will lead you down the path to innovation that does work. I also think that there is sometimes a challenge that people want to do a moonshot first thing, and a lot of times the first thing is to get across the street. Okay, you know what? You did get across the street. Now we can bring in the extra resources we need to get you to the moon.
Yep. One of the challenges I made to you, Deb, was within your community, we believe, are the entrepreneurs and the innovators and the investors and the backers and all of the different types of people that can, over the coming years, contribute to this. What do you think your unique approach at Beyond Type 1 can do to unlock more of these stakeholders, including investors, to back the entrepreneurs and the innovators in type 1 diabetes?
It is so important to diversify the funding models, and a lot comes from the narrative. So having the index that makes your impact evidence-based, and to be able to go into a company and talk about health equity and say, we've got this one area that we think we can go in and show that it went from X to Y for your annual report. And you've been able to go into this community and do X. Like that narrative, many companies, many family philanthropy, they don't know what to do. They actually are like, I want to do something, I want to live a life of purpose, I want to do more than just be a kind person, but what is it that I'm going to do that's really going to change the game? And so you have to sprinkle the narrative and give them some outlets and say, it could happen this way. And you could be able to tell your children you did this. That narrative and amplifying it is a story that leads to engagement, that leads to funding, time and time again.
And another great segue to the final real clip. I said it was going to be the last one. There's one more to wrap this up. If we could roll the final clip.
We are one step closer to a cure. But science alone isn't enough. It needs a spotlight, a champion, and money. If we rethink how we cure disease, then the breakthroughs that we so desperately need and want will come. Will we get there in 5 years? I think we can.
So we have one question back here. We'll go first. Just state your name and ask the question.
No, I'm running the mics. It's Rico.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't see. Sorry, over here. Yeah, sorry about that. There was light in my eyes.
Hello? Okay, you can hear me. So my name is Jessica Bradley. I'm here because I work in remote patient monitoring, but I'm standing here because I'm a patient. And first I want to say thank you to you and everybody else in this room that works every day to help us get through this and past this. And I was diagnosed at 14, and I've gone through professionally working in diabetes, and am now an advocate and ambassador for diabetes. So my question to you is, for patients and friends of mine that are global advocates, what is the best, maybe how is the best way that we can connect with organizations like yours to really get involved? You know, we want to use our voices and create this change that we just spent the last hour and a half talking about, but what is the best way for us to connect with your organizations or others to help make that change?
Oh my God, how courageous of you, by the way. Can we give her a hand? So nice. I mean, I have a ridiculously small team, but I would say 12 out of 25 have type 1, so that when we market, when we do anything, it's a very authentic voice and with true meaning and relatability, which is very, very important. But there's so many things, and I know we're a little bit like the global citizen, where like today we're saying, take these signs and actually, you know, put them up in your nurse's office, at your kid's camp, and then tomorrow it might be share this, or entrepreneurs, please come, we're doing startup health. So there's lots of calls to action, but I think all of us would be so open to more people helping, more people volunteering. It takes an army, and we're just trying to grow that army, so thank you. Anybody else?
No, absolutely. I mean, JDRF was founded by volunteers, and they still power everything we do. I think we try to be as transparent as possible on our website and other places, but we're actually trying to kind of up our game in that area as well. I mean, but I think everything from, you know, it depends on what people's interests are and what they want to do, but we have a very active advocacy program. You know, you can sign up to get more information about clinical trials. You can sign up to sort of educate other people about type 1 diabetes. You know, you can, you know, bring new information to newly diagnosed people. We do a lot of that to sort of help people as they begin their journey, and volunteers play a key role in that. We have all of our fundraising programs, walk and biking and gala, and that sort of creates community along the way. So there's a whole range of options that, you know, you can go to jdrf.org or connect with us personally. You know, that's what we want to do, is we want people to be involved. So thank you. Great.
Yeah, and I would add, first of all, from the heart, that was beautiful, and thank you for that. And to add on to what Deb and Cynthia said, you find your way when you find out the organization and the purpose that you want to fill. But I wanted to add the entrepreneurial view, that you don't necessarily have to come up with like the next thing in type 1 diabetes, but they're incredible companies that are already nascent, you know, with scientists or doctors or entrepreneurs who have started things, and you may have a professional talent, a marketing talent, or whatever it is, that you may join and help accelerate their mission. And so every day when you wake up, you're excited to come to work. I don't even remember how many, like every Sunday that I was in the office. In New York City, they actually don't turn on the heat in the buildings. So I had heaters and fans for the summer. like you forget all that when you're doing something you love. And so there might be organizations out there, like Startup Health as well, that are aligned with the mission, and you may find you may give through JDRF or beyond type 1 or commercially. And so that's an opportunity as well.
So the day that we decided that David was going to lead this moonshot, we had a discussion, and before he got business cards, he said, can we just do one thing though? Can we set up an email address? And it's T1D@startuphealth.com. And that email address, since we published it, I think in May for the first time when we published a magazine announcing our type 1 diabetes moonshot, it's amazing to me how many different types of stakeholders and types of people have used that email address, and how we've been able to filter that to different stakeholders, the startups, the investors, and the partners. But this idea that it's as easy as sending an email to get involved, and all of our organizations are collaborating. And our whole mission is to create a global army of entrepreneurs and innovators and investors and organizations that all want to do one thing, and not that different, quite frankly, than landing a man on the moon and bringing him safely back in the 60s, right? So this moonshot is about you, and it's about people like you all around the world not having to worry about how to get involved, but just sending an email and we'll help you figure it out.
I love it. I'll share with my network. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I would like to make one last, just one last comment on that. Don't be afraid to ask. I have people contact me all the time, and there are so many things happening at a corporate level. Corporate's always looking for partnerships. So what's the worst going to happen? They'll say no. Okay? Always ask.
So as a wrap up, I'm going to ask, starting with Deb, each of you to say what your biggest insight is. You know, we've, many of us, some of you have known each other for a long time, some of us are brand new friends, but we spent the last 6 or 8 weeks talking about this panel, the last several months talking about this documentary and how we can get the word out, and not just through the Startup Health channels and the Beyond Type 1 channels and the JDRF channels, but really use this moment today as World Diabetes Day, this moonshot, to make the kind of impact we've been talking about for the last 90 minutes. But I'd love to hear maybe a new insight or biggest insight from participating on today's panel.
Well, you know, they say it takes a village, and it's almost cliche now, but the collaboration just even with us and with the community is quite unique. And so I do feel like it can lead to bigger and better things. The fact that this film was made, I just think it was so brave. And Marla, I'm gonna say hats off to you. And the filmmakers and everything. Think of how many documentaries are made in a year, in the top 130 that are now being considered for Oscar. A film about clinical trials in that list. So it will make a big impact and have people start thinking about things differently. And then the fact that something like a moonshot, right? It's sort of a beautiful word, right? With Startup Health exists, and there's a new path and a new way to think about things. I do feel like, boom, technology is happening, and boom, there's entrepreneurs, and boom, philanthropy is being redone, and everything's accelerated so fast right now. We can have faster cures. So I get inspired, and I thank you all for letting me participate.
Love it. Tomas?
So, I'm working. There we go. I think hands down, it boils down to what we can learn from each other. How we can.
You use David's.
You're cutting out again.
So I think it boils down to the collaboration. When I was in practice, patients taught me unbelievable ways to improve their care. And as we move the technology forward with continuous glucose monitoring, with closed loop and hybrid closed loop, and hopefully soon fully closed loop technology, that patient feedback, the user feedback, the feedback from the community teaches us constantly at a company level. And if you're not willing to learn, you're in the wrong business. This is something that is going to take a group effort, and there is going to have to be patience, and there will be setbacks, but we keep moving it forward. That's the critical point.
Yeah, and what I would add, the word collaboration, we've talked about it, but that would be my closing thought. I mean, with Marla and Robert Oranger being the catalyst for the movie that drove us all coming together and brainstorming about the panel, and through that, finding multiple ways to help and collaborate together. I mean, even companies that JDRF has, has provided grants to that need a bridge to get to their level of financing and growth. Well, that, we kind of knew in the back of our minds that that's there, but kind of getting together and working as a team in the collaborative mode is really the beginnings of a total transformational movement in this space. And it really is beautiful and heartwarming, and I thank everybody that's been here today.
Well, I agree, collaboration is key and critical. I think what I would add, though, is, when I started JDRF, you could count the number of type 1 diabetes clinical trials, human clinical trials, on one hand. And now, JDRF alone is funding 50, and there are many, many more in the ecosystem. We're at a moment where we got amazing science that we're leveraging for type 1 diabetes. It's really a renaissance time in science. And we're finally bringing some of these things to scale. And it's really through catalyzing the collaboration and catalyzing. We have so many more clinical trials. We have so many more approaches in the science. And those things are moving through the pipeline and making it to people with type 1 diabetes. And it's just such an exciting time of sort of the community coming together and different, innovative leaders kind of creating tools that help unleash, I think, even more action and more innovation. So it's a really important time.
So you guys said we couldn't fill up 90 minutes with anything to talk about. When we first found out we had 90 minutes, by the way, it's been 95.
Oh my God.
You said, we talked about that. What are we gonna do for 90 minutes, right? There is this framework we talk about. You heard David mention batteries included versus batteries not included. And we have believed since the day we launched Startup Health in 2011 that the key indicator of the kind of people you wanna have involved in innovation and in achieving moonshots, it's all about the energy that comes from the people and the organizations that are going to do this. And so for those of you who are doubting in any way, shape, or form the batteries included nature of any of these people, any of these organizations, or any of you, we believe that just for the next decade, spend as much time as we can to get everybody whose batteries included, who have the capabilities to help us, to keep this conversation going. Marla and Robert helping create and publish and produce a movie that tells these important stories is just the beginning. So on World Diabetes Day, I hope as we wrap up a great first day at Health and at Startup Health Festival, we remember to bring energy and bring these batteries included mindsets to every conversation about how we can prevent, manage, and cure diabetes. Thank all of you, and have a great afternoon.